Okay, so I'm going to share this question, and when I share it, I think some of you will be like, what? You can't ask that. When you might be offended even by the question itself, because I kind of reacted that way. So, all right. How do you reconcile the God of the Old Testament who permitted genocide, and in parentheses, just to clarify, killing of men, women, and children of whole towns/people, with the God of reconciliation, love, and justice today? What is our role as the church and as individuals when we see atrocities happening in the world, such as the genocide of Palestinians by Israel happening now? Ooh. Some of you are like, what? So thank you, Lisa, for giving me, you gave me such an easy question to answer. Finally. Yeah, the time limit, yeah. Yeah, Lisa, are you going to be here next Sunday, or is this your...
I don't think I can because we're hosting Christmas at my house, so I can fly out the next day.
So this, she gave us the question, like a couple weeks ago? Yeah, and I was like, shoot, I already have a couple things I want to talk about, and I really tried to pass it off to Brian, and Brian was like, I'm going to preach in Beloit this week. I'm like, all right then, we're tackling this. Yes, thank you for the easy question, and also, I hope to resolve all the problems in the Middle East today. So thank you for coming for this historic occasion. Nobody else can solve them, but I will. So just to warn you, I have, normally when I prepare my messages, I shoot for about 12 pages of notes, and sometimes, usually I prepare 15 to 18, and then I try to cram it in. Today, I have 32 pages of prepared notes, but I have 60 pages of extra stuff that I can refer to if required. So I hope you're, ready for the long haul. No, I'm going to try to give like an overview, not an overview. I'm going to gloss over some stuff, but hopefully I'll cover things enough so it makes sense. All right. So this question really breaks down. I broke it down into four different questions. Number one, how do we reconcile the Old Testament God who called for genocide of whole people groups with the New Testament image we have of a God of reconciliation and love? And that's a question that had bothered me for a number of years. Now I think I have some good answers to it. And number two, what is our role as the church and as individuals when we see atrocities in the world today? Number three, is Israel committing genocide against the Palestinians? The question assumes they are, but I think let's ask, are they? Number four, how should we as believers respond to what is happening and has happened between Israel and the Palestinians? So I broke it down into those four questions, and I'll handle each one in turn. I apologize, I did not have time. Well, I guess I could have made a PowerPoint, but instead I was just doing way too much research on all this stuff. Learned more than I can possibly share. So I don't have a PowerPoint, so hopefully you'll be able to follow along all right. So before answering these questions, though, I want to lay down a few, I'm calling them in my notes ground rules, some basic things so that we have the same framework that we're dealing with. Because there's enough, one of the things that I've learned, especially with this topic, is everyone has an opinion, and they're very opinionated about their opinion. And sometimes you see people arguing something, and it's like your terms you're using are different, or you use the same terms but in different ways. And so let's at least establish some sort of framework where we can go from this and look at the questions. Number one of the ground rules, Israel of the Old Testament and modern Israel are not the same. They share the same name. They are not the same. Old Testament Israel was a theocracy built around the extended family of Abraham's grandson Jacob, who God changed his name to Israel, and the promises of God to him and his family. That's Old Testament Israel. Modern Israel is an a-religious, secular, political nation state that was formed in 1948 on land that at the time was inhabited mostly by Arabs, who today are the Palestinians. They're not the same entity. One was a theocracy, modern Israel. The Old Testament biblical Israel was a theocracy with family lines and a covenant from God. Modern Israel is not that. Modern Israel is a political entity. When Israel took over Canaan, it was led by Joshua, a man of God who spent his days seeking God in the tabernacle. He lived rightly before God. He walked with God. He heard God's voice. He stood in faith and saw God perform miracles. He was there when they left Egypt. He was there to see the plagues on Egypt. He saw the Red Sea open up. God used him to open up the Jordan River and cross on dry ground. He saw the miraculous manna. He saw God send the quails. He saw the ground open up and swallow Korah and all the people that were rebelling. He saw the pillar of fire and the pillar of clouds. And so Joshua, who led the conquest of Canaan, was a man of God who was walking in deep relationship with God. Today, in modern Israel, there are absolutely zero modern Israelis who are walking rightly with God according to Old Testament Jewish law. How can I say that so confidently? Because the Old Testament Jewish law has a system of sacrifices that were meant to be done in the temple. Israel does not have a temple, and there are no sacrifices being done. So no modern Israelis are walking rightly with God according to that old covenant. Now, you could say, well, okay, God shifted the covenant, or God makes allowance for that because of the situation they're in. You could argue that. But the truth of the matter is that no modern Israelis are walking according to the old covenant as Joshua was, and as the intention was for the people of Israel of his day. Today, modern Israel, 20% of modern Israelis are atheists. That's pretty big. It's not like, people talk about, oh, we got to support Israel because they're the people of God. They love God. They're the Jewish people, and they're keeping the old covenant. They are not keeping the old covenant. 20% are atheists, in fact. They're secular Jews. They're Jewish by lineage, by ethnicity, but they don't practice their religion. 17% of Israelis in modern Israel are Muslims. They don't make any claims to having a covenant with God. 2% are Druze. Raise your hand if you've heard of the Druze. So just Jesse and Lisa a little bit. The Druze, I first heard of them when I visited Israel last year. The Druze are a weird combination of Muslim, Hindu, Christian, and Greek Gnostics with weird supernatural pagan rituals and stuff kind of put in the mix. They're very odd. It's a very odd religion. They believe in reincarnation, and they believe they don't try to propagate their faith because all the Druze that have ever been, they already exist, and then when they die, that new Druze are reincarnated as new people, so you can't propagate the faith. So it's a very bizarre faith, but that's 2% of modern Israelis are Druze, and the estimate is anywhere between 0.5% and 2% of modern Israelis are Christians. Side note, the estimate is that 7% of Palestinians are Christians. So it's a point of contention among Palestinian Christians. They struggle with, why do American churches and American Christians support Jewish Israelis, but they don't support us? We're their brothers, the Palestinian Christians. And why do they support the Israelis more? And the Israelis, there's very few Christians there. And so there is a point of contention there, and that's a good point. But that's very different. Modern Israel is not the same as the Israel of the Old Testament. Number 2, modern Israel has no claim on the promises of God to biblical Israel unless they repent and receive the Messiah. God made a new covenant with mankind through Jesus. That's the covenant that we're under. There was Paul talks about being grafted into the vine. I picture it like this, like there's the people of God, the vine of the people of God. And he started with the children of Israel. But even then, when you had, even before Israel, you had Adam and Eve were walking with God. You had Noah was walking with God. You had Abraham was walking with God. And so you have this vine of the people of God. And then at one point in history, God worked specifically through the children of Israel, and he made this nation state, a theocracy of the people of God, and he gave them the law, But even at that time, it wasn't just the Jews. Other foreigners were allowed, if they wanted to join with that, to be part of the vine. And then eventually, about 2,000 years ago, God sent the Messiah, Jesus. The people of God, the Israelites, rejected him. Not all of them. The majority of them rejected him. But some Pharisees and others received Jesus, and regular Jewish people as well. They received Jesus, and they stayed within the vine. But those that rejected the Messiah, God tore them off from the vine. Now he can reattach them, and he can tear us off too if we turn our hearts against Jesus. We reject him. Well, there's no guarantee you don't get to stay on the vine if you jump off the vine. So God made a covenant, and they rejected it. When he sent them to the final provision, the fulfillment of the covenant, the Messiah, Israel as a whole rejected that Messiah. So they can't make claims of this covenant that they've walked away from. And they're not keeping the old covenant. So now we have this new covenant. They've rejected that, and they don't keep the old covenant. So they can't make claims on the promises of God to Israel in the Old Testament. Hebrews 8:13 says, in speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete. And what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away. God made a new covenant, and making a new covenant, the old one is obsolete. I don't know how you can be any more clear than that. We don't live according to the old Jewish laws anymore, the old covenant. And so that doesn't stand. And so there are Christians that say, well, we need to support Israel because they're the people of God. They're in covenant with God. No, that old covenant is obsolete. We have a new covenant through Jesus, and they can get in that covenant. They can hold on to it, but they got to receive the Messiah. And without receiving the Messiah, they're not in covenant with God, and so they can't claim any of the promises of the covenant. All right. What do I have here? Paul talks about, in Romans 9, it says, for not all who are descended from Israel belong to Israel, and not all are children of Abraham because they are his offspring. But through Isaac shall your offspring be named. This means that it is not the children of the flesh who are the children of God, but the children of the promise are counted as offspring. What makes us children of God is our faith in God. It's not through, were you a descendant, a physical descendant of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob. No, that's not what makes you a child of God anymore. All who are of Israel, he says, are not really Israel. Not all the Jews are part of the people of God. The real people of God, it's the ones who are the people of God through the promise, through faith. So modern Israel, and I know other Christians will argue with this. Other churches will say, no, Israel can make a claim on the promise of God because God spoke it to them and he's faithful to always do that. Yes, he is, but if you break the covenant, the covenant is not unconditional. When you make a covenant with God, you break that. You can repent and come back, but if you don't, that's done. So Israel cannot claim the same promises. They can't claim the Old Testament promises. And so anything they're doing today, they can't say, well, God gave us the land. Yeah, he did. And he said, if you don't keep the covenant, I'm kicking you out. And he kicked you out. And then there's no further promise that they would receive the land again. All right. And you're free to disagree with me on that, but I can give you more scriptures privately. Number 3, what God commanded Israel to do at one time is not the same as what he commanded Israel to do at other times. Even when you look at Israel moving into the promised land and then establishing a nation there, and you look at that short period of history, even just that short period of history, God commands them to do different things at different times. Sometimes he tells them, take that city, kill every man, woman, child, every animal, and burn everything, tear all the walls down. I want nothing left standing. Other times he said, kill all the men, kill all the women, the married women, but you can keep the unmarried women and you can keep the kids. Other times he said, kill all the people, but keep the animals. Other times he said, spare the city. Don't go around them. Don't attack them. Other times just attack the men and attack the soldiers, and that's it. So God tells Israel to do one thing here, but that doesn't mean that that's the condition always, the same command always. He tells them to do different things at various times. Number 4, what God commanded Israel of the Old Testament to do is not the same as what he may want modern Israel to do, because they're not the same. They don't have the same covenant. They're not the same people. And so what what he commanded Old Testament Israel to do, that's not necessarily what he's commanding modern, or what he would want modern Israel to do. So just because God commanded Joshua, go into the land and wipe out the Canaanites, doesn't mean that Israel can say, okay, we're going to go in and we're going to wipe out the Palestinians. And I've heard Christians make that argument. Well, Israel was commanded to take the land and wipe out the Canaanites. Joshua, leading Israel at that time in their history, was commanded to do that. Modern Israel, as far as I know, I don't know, but God has not told me anyway, that he has spoken to, the leaders of Israel and told them, wipe out the Palestinians. And I think a lot of the leaders in Israel don't want to do that. I'm sure there's some that have wanted to, and I found some creepy statements of some of them that sound along those lines. But I think the majority of them, the evidence shows that they don't want to do that. They could wipe out the Palestinians if they really wanted to. They could nuke Gaza and then boom, it's just done. Would they do that even if, I don't think I think they're smart enough to know don't do that even if they wanted to. But okay, number 5. No, is that what I just said? No. Number 5, what God commanded Israel of the Old Testament to do is not necessarily the same as what he may command us to do. This is very important. I was listening to a sermon someone sent me recently. They said, this pastor, you need to listen to this sermon. This pastor's, his way of looking at Israel and their conquest of Canaan, it's so good. But the ultimate end result of his sermon was he was saying that because Israel invaded Canaan and wiped out the infidels, we need to wipe out infidels. And I'm like, did you listen to this to the end? Because the end of what he says is not good. No, God told Joshua to lead Israel to do this. You can't take that and go, so I should kill the homosexuals and kill the Democrats or kill the Republicans. No equivalency there. He told Joshua to do that at that time in Israel's existence. He's not telling you to go kill the people that you disagree with. And all throughout the history of God dealing with people, he deals with people in different ways. Adam and Eve, what did he tell Adam and Eve to do? Did he tell them to wipe out the Canaanites? No, there were no Canaanites at the time. Did he tell them to wipe out anybody? No. He told them, don't eat the fruit of that tree. That's it. Has he told you to not eat any fruit from trees? No. We have a different command now. God gives different commands to different people at different times for different reasons. So you can't just take one and apply it to yourself just because you want to. All right, number 6, the God of the Old Testament and the New Testament are the same God. It would be easy to say, and people have. There's Christian heresies that throughout history that have popped up where people have said, well, that's a different God. That's an angry God. The God of the Old Testament that commanded the Jews to go and kill Canaanites. That's a different God. But we have a God of the New Testament. He's a new God. He's a merciful God. He's a loving God. No, the Bible is very clear. They're the same God. And so we can't just... We're forced to reconcile this. Hebrews 1, verse 1 through 3 says, long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. So long ago, he spoke through the prophets. Today, he's speaking through the Son. But he's the same God overall. James 1, verse 17 says, there's no variation or shadow due to change. So, we might look at what he did in the Old Testament, and then we look at the New Testament and how we preach Jesus today, and we go, okay, these seem very different, but they have to be the same God. So there has to be a way that we can reconcile these things. We can't just go, yeah, that's a different God. We're not afforded that luxury. Number 7, and this is the last of my ground rules. 2 Timothy 3:16 says that all Scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness. So if it happened in the Old Testament, God isn't necessarily telling us to do that. He's not necessarily saying that this is what modern Israel should do. But if it happened there and it's in the Bible, there is something useful we can gain from it. We can learn about God. We can learn about his character. We can learn about people and the dangers of sin and the blessings of righteousness. And we can learn about how the world works. All Scripture is profitable for us somehow to receive something from God. So when we see something in the Old Testament that's concerning, we shouldn't just go, I can't gain anything from that. No, dig in deeper. God can teach you something with that because he promises he will. Okay. Those are my ground rules. Let's look at question 1. So question 1, how do we reconcile the Old Testament God who called for genocide of whole people groups with the New Testament image we have of a God of reconciliation and love. So this image, this reality that the God who commanded Israel to wipe out the Canaanites seems very different from Jesus. This has bothered me for a long time. Raise your hand if this has ever bothered you. Raise your hand if you've been like, yeah, no. It's unsettling, and it should be. We shouldn't read about the taking over the promised land and go, I love that. I love Israel just wiping people out. It should be disconcerting to us. We're not afforded the luxury of, we can't ignore it. We can't throw it out. We can't, We can't over-spiritualize it. We can't say, oh, well, that's just a metaphor. No, Israel did this. We know. We have archaeological evidence of cities that they destroyed. We have records from Egypt and from neighboring kingdoms of the Israelites destroying places. So we know it happened. And we know, some people like to say, oh, well, Israel chose to do that. God didn't really tell them to do that. No, the Bible is clear. Israel did it because God told them to do it. And not only that, but he punished people who didn't do it. When he told Saul to go and wipe out all the Amalekites, Saul didn't do it. He allowed the people to save some of the stuff for themselves. And God rebuked Saul and stripped the throne from him because he didn't wipe out the people he was supposed to wipe out. So these are troubling things, but we got to deal with it because it's in the Bible. Let me take a drink. All right, so I've got a few initial thoughts, and hopefully I can get through these. First, if we're to answer this question, we need to establish the fact that, number one, whatever God does or commands to be done is good and just and right. God is good. He is just. He is right. He is loving. So if he says to do something, it is that. And if we look at it and we say, well, that doesn't seem loving, that doesn't seem fair, that doesn't seem just, there's two possibilities there. Either you're wrong. Well, you're wrong no matter what. Either you're wrong and you need to repent and just go, okay, God, change my attitude, change my heart so I can see it as you see it. Or help me to trust you and believe that it's good even though it doesn't look good to me. So that could be the case. Or the other case is maybe you understand it wrong and you need to dig in a little bit deeper, and then you can realize, oh my gosh, God is way more loving and good than I ever thought imaginable. I think there's a little bit of both of those in dealing with specifically Israel taking over Canaan. All right, second initial thought I have is there are things worse than death. In our modern times where we're so insulated from all sorts of all types of suffering, death scares us so much, and death is like the worst thing possible, the be all end all. We hear about someone dying, we're like, oh no. You talk to other people that grow up in like societies where death is just normal, they don't view it that way. What was I was just reading a book. What book was this? I can't remember what it was, but it was about people. Well, it was about some war. It was interviewing people that had passed through a war or genocide. Man, I wish I could remember what it was. And basically, they grew up in the midst of war, and they just kind of got used to hearing bombs go off and people dying, and it was like, okay, somebody else died, and like they're sad because they died, but if you don't expect to live when you're growing up surrounded by war. We're so isolated from that stuff, and so from our perspective, death is like the worst thing ever. From God's perspective, when you read the Bible, it doesn't seem like death is that big a deal. He's obviously death, he died to conquer death. So it is a big deal, but there are worse things than death. From God's perspective, when you read the Bible, it seems like he's way more concerned with eternity. He's way more concerned with what are the ramifications down the road from this. And so we look at situations where Israel wipes out whole villages and whole people groups, and to us we're like, that's awful because they're dead. Well, maybe God in his wisdom realized, okay, if I let them stay like this, they are going to suffer and hurt each other and grow up and even these little kids that you say, well, they're really innocent. Yeah, but maybe God looks at it and he goes, they're going to just suffer, 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 and then they're going to grow up bitter and angry, and they're going to cause way more suffering and way more hurt around the world. Where now, if I judge them now and if I take them out now, I can spare them from that. And maybe there's a chance for them, maybe they have a little bit of faith in me right now, and I can take them out and they can get into heaven and escape all this. Or maybe it's not even about that, but he goes, well, okay, if I let them stay, they're just going to cause a whole lot more problems. But if I get rid of them, then the problem solved. So, I mean, we're talking about a God who looked down on the earth and saw that everybody was wicked in Genesis 6 and said, kill them all. So, I mean, God's perspective on death is not as bad as ours is. It may be kind of hard to deal with and hear that, but that's just the reality when you see the character of God in the Bible. Death is not the worst. Even Jesus, Matthew 10:28 says, do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. That is way more important. Our physical life, whether you live 20 years or 120 years, that's going to be done at some point, but eternity is going to remain forever. And so God seems way more concerned with the eternal ramifications than with just our short time on the earth. Third thing, initial thought regarding this question, those were different times back then. So Israel invaded Canaan about 1200 BC. That was over 3,000 years ago. People were different, times were different, empires were different, governments were different, everything was different back then. And we can't judge them in the Old Testament 3,000 years ago based on revelation that they didn't have but we have now. We have Jesus. Here's two big things that are radically different now versus back then. We have Jesus. Jesus died on the cross, rose again, conquered sin and hell and Satan and everything. That didn't happen yet. It's happened for us. And the second big thing is the Holy Spirit was not poured out on the people of God yet. The Holy Spirit would descend and he would do certain things at certain times and fill certain people, but he was not poured out on the people of God. So those are two big things that are radically different now. So we have that. And we have the Word of God, and we have the teachings of Jesus. Jesus came and brought a radically different worldview of love your enemy, forgive. If someone hits you on the cheek, show them the other cheek. If they tell you to walk 1 mile, walk with them 2 miles. We have a very different revelation of God that they didn't have back then. And so the expectation that God has on us is different than the expectation that he had on them. And so that's important to keep in perspective when we talk about what Israel was told to do. There are hints of the new covenant throughout the Old Testament, but it's not until Jesus that things really are. It's not until then that we got the new covenant, but there's hints throughout the Old Covenant. All right, so number 4. Israel's experiences often in the Old Testament are portrayed in the New Testament, are declared to be a type or a shadow for us. And so this is another thing to keep in mind, that when Israel did certain things, or when God worked certain ways through Israel, that yes, it happened, and yes, God is just and God is good, and so there is a good reason for that. But what we can gain from it is not necessarily we should go and do the same, but okay, what's the lesson there? What is the type in the shadow? What is this trying to portray? And so in terms of the Canaanites and Israel taking over their land, this could be a greater type and shadow of spiritual warfare. It can be talking about the dangers of sin. And if you allow a little bit of sin in your life, like God told the Israelites, you need to wipe them out, because if you don't, they are going to be a thorn in your flesh, and they're going to drag you down. And you see that happening. And so this could be a bigger picture of the reality of the power of sin, that if you leave a little bit of sin in your life, it's going to drag you down. I remember hearing when I was first a believer, one of the pastors at the church I was going to, he was talking about somebody, was it his dad? It might have been his dad, getting saved, and he was a big drinker. And then he threw out all of his alcohol except for his favorite stuff, because he told his son, yeah, you just never know, I might fall back into it, and I want to make sure I got the good stuff. It's like, okay, if that's what you're doing, you're going to fall back into it. And so when we look at Israel taking over Canaan, it can be a type and a shadow for the spiritual warfare that we face, and don't allow any of it to remain. and that doesn't discount the fact that this really happened, and if God said it and if God said to do it, that it's good, and there has to be a good reason for it. But there is also a deeper meaning that we can gain from these things. Okay. In 1 Corinthians 10:11, Paul says, "Now these things happen to them as an example." And this is specifically in context. He's talking about Israel going into the promised land. He said, "These things happened to them as an example, but they were written down for our instruction, on whom the end of the ages has come." So they happened to the Israelites, but there's the truth of it happening, but there's also the truth of, okay, God, what is the example for me here? All right, and so we can see a lot. We can see the fact that God is holy and perfect, and he demands holiness among his people. We can see the dangers of sin, the destructiveness of sin. We can see how sin is messy. You know, the Canaanites would never have been wiped out if they had followed God. But as soon as you choose to sin, everything gets messy and hard and complicated, and now you got to deal with that. It shows the reality of people. People are sinful. People are foolish. People are selfish. Shows the patience of God, too. God waited at least 400 years before he brought judgment on Canaan. So, man, that's a long time. It's not like, when the first sin came in Canaan, God's like, wipe them out. Abraham, go slaughter them all. No, he waited 400 years and even allowed his own people to become slaves in Egypt while he waited for the sin to reach a point where he brought judgment. So there's a lot that we can learn about the character of God and about how people live and respond toward God through that. Number 5, thought to consider, God, I guess I just mentioned this, God was patient with the Canaanites. So yeah, when, I think it's, where is it? Genesis 15:13, Abraham is wandering through Canaan, and God tells Abraham that the sin of the Amorites is not yet complete. And he tells Abraham, your people, you're going to have kids who have more kids, but they're going to become slaves in Egypt for 400 years. But then after that, I'm going to bring them to this land, because then the sin will be complete, and I can bring my judgment, and they can take the land. So God waited over 400 years to bring judgment on Canaan. He's a patient God. Don't test him, because he will bring judgment, but he's a patient God. Number 6, God didn't give Israel a free pass going into Canaan either. So God brought judgment on Canaan for their sin. But he warned Israel, you're not off the hook just because you're my people. He held them to the same standard, and you could argue even a higher standard than the Canaanites were held to. And actually, let me read these first. So Leviticus chapter 18, verses 24 to 28 says, "Do not make yourselves unclean by any of these things," talking about what the Canaanites were doing. For by all these things the nations I am driving out before you have become unclean, and the land became unclean, so that I punished its iniquity, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. But you shall keep my statutes and my rules, and do none of these abominations, either the native or the stranger who sojourns among you. For the people of the land who were before you did all of these abominations, so that the land became unclean. Lest the land vomit you out when you make it unclean, as it vomited out the nations that were before you. That's intense. So God's warning them. He's like, look, you see how they live. You know what they've done. You know I hate this stuff, and that's why I'm driving them out. You don't do that stuff, or I'm going to cause the land to throw you up as well. It's like, man, that's kind of harsh. But it's true. And so he held them to the same standard. It's not like God's like, oh, Israel, you're my preferred people. I love you so much. You can do whatever you want. I got to get rid of these bad Canaanites, and you can hate them and destroy them because I don't like them either. No, that's the stuff they were doing was bad, and it required God to judge them. And God's warning here, don't do what they do or I'm going to kick you out, is exactly what happened. Israel did the same exact things, and you can look at the sins that the Canaanites were doing, and you go, oh, Israel did that. And many times throughout throughout the prophets and the books of 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings in particular, it makes statements of, so-and-so did just what the nations before them were doing. And then God kicked them out. So the Canaanites lived in the land over 400 years. Do you guys know how long the Israelites were in the land before God kicked them out? So depending on, what did you say? Yeah, right around there. Depending on when you want to start the numbering, either less than that or a little bit more than that. So the nation was split into two, northern kingdom of Israel and southern kingdom of Judah. So northern kingdom of Israel only made it like 300 years before God kicked them out. The southern kingdom of Judah made it between 400 and 600 years, depending on where you start the dating. So it really, they didn't do much better than the Canaanites did. They went right back into it, and God had to kick them out as well. Number 7 thing to consider, the Canaanites were not good people who were just trying to live in peace until Israel came in and attacked them. It wasn't a bunch of peace-loving hippies that were just enjoying their lives, and then, oh, now these bad Israelites are coming and they're committing genocide. The Canaanites were bad. Genesis 15:16 talks about that, well, the discussion with Abraham and God, where God says their sin has not reached its completion yet. It's not full yet. So we know that they were sinful, and that at some point they were full of sin. And in Leviticus 20, verses 22 to 23, you shall therefore keep all my statutes and all my rules and do them, that the land where I am bringing you to live may not vomit you out. And you shall not walk in the customs of the nation that I am driving out before you, for they did all these things, and therefore I detested them. So they do detestable abominations, and God vomited them out. Well, had the land vomit them out. Deuteronomy 9:5. Not because of your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart are you going in to possess their land, but because of the wickedness of these nations, the Lord your God is driving them out from before you, and that he may confirm the word that the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Deuteronomy 12:31. You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way, for every abominable thing that the Lord hates they have done. Every abominable thing that the Lord hates they have done. They have done for their gods. For they even burn their sons and their daughters in the fire to their gods, sacrificing their own children. 2 Kings 21:2, talking about King Manasseh. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to the despicable practices of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. They had temple prostitutes. They worshipped idols. They burned their sons and daughters in sacrifice to demon gods. One of the groups. So the question of who exactly are the Canaanites is debatable. We know the general area they were, but there's certain tribes where we know they were in the Canaanite group. Others, some people say they were, some people say they weren't. One of those tribes is the Amalekites. The Amalekites were not good people. They were the first to attack Israel as they went through the wilderness. And the Amalekites in Egyptian were called the Kabadi, which means the plunderers. These were not just nice, peaceful people. They were bad people. Genesis 10:19 gives the borders of Canaan. It says they reached from Sidon toward Gerar as far as Gaza, and then toward Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim as far as Lasha. Recognize any infamous cities in there? Sodom and Gomorrah were Canaanite cities, pretty famous for their sin. Admah and Zeboim says in Deuteronomy 29:23 that the Lord overthrew those two cities in anger and wrath. These were not good people. They were bad people doing bad things. Christopher J.H. Wright, in his book, The God I Don't Understand, says about it, the degraded character of Canaanite society and religion includes the sexual promiscuity and perversion particularly associated with fertility cults, as well as the callousness of child sacrifice. This is reinforced in the historical texts, so like the Kings and Chronicles, with additional notes about social oppression and violence. They had perverse sexuality mixed with, or perverse sexual immorality mixed with false worship and idolatry and human sacrifice and injustice and oppression. They're not good. It's bad. Number 8, not only were the Canaanites bad, they were also not a good influence on Israel. Numbers 33, verse 55 and 56. If you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then those of them whom you let remain shall be as barbs in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they shall trouble you in the land where you dwell, and I will do to you as I thought to do to them. So God is warning them, look, drive them out, or they're going to cause problems for you, and you're going to do the same things that they do, and I'll have to drive you out as well. And we know that's what happened. Number 9. So as disturbing as the conquest of Canaan is, and the instances where Israel is told to wipe out whole populations of people, it's not the only unsettling thing that God did in the Bible. And now this may not make you feel better. Maybe this disturbs you more. But this brings comfort to me, where I'm like, okay, if it's a one-off where God tells them to do some crazy thing, and it's like, that looks bad, then I'm like, oh man, why is God bad? But if you see bad things, quote, bad things happening throughout it, then I go, probably the problem is me. Either I don't understand it right, or I just don't think like God. It's a big surprise. And so I need to change how I think. So what about the plagues on Egypt? Pharaoh was stubborn. Were all the Egyptian people stubborn and bad? No. There had to be some innocent Egyptians there. But Pharaoh was stubborn, and so his entire country suffered as a result. And the Israelites suffered too in the midst of this. It wasn't like, I mean, there are occasions where like the darkness fell among the Egyptians, but not among the Israelites. But some of the times, like when the Nile turned to blood, everybody's got the Nile full of blood. And so the Israelites had to suffer along with the Egyptians. And the Israelites were not only innocent before God, they were his people. And so, that's troubling to me, that God didn't just take out Pharaoh because Pharaoh was bad. The whole place suffered. Doesn't seem necessarily fair. What about the wilderness wandering? Just because 12 spies didn't have faith, everybody else has to suffer? And like that's like generational genocide. And then God wanted to wipe them all out too, because he's like, I can't take it. These guys are building golden calf statues and stuff, and I'm their God. I love them. I delivered them from slavery, and they're worshiping cows. Let me wipe them out. That's a little bit troubling. And yeah, they're wandering through the desert for 40 years because God wants to kill them. Okay, but it happened. What about the quail? The people, as they're wandering through the desert, they're complaining for meat because magical bread's not enough, I guess. And so he's like, all right, I'll give you quail. And when you eat it, you're going to get a plague and die. Like, okay, got to deal with that. Not how I would have handled it. But I think it would have been fun to do. Okay, this one really bothers me. Numbers 15, it's they stone a Sabbath breaker. So the Israelites were supposed to keep the Sabbath. On the Sabbath, you don't do work. Well, what does this guy go to do? He goes and gathers sticks, and they kill him because he picked up sticks. Like, that's hard to deal with. But it happened. God wanted it to happen. God told it to happen. He made the law behind it. So why is it there? And what can we learn about God, and what can we learn about human nature through this? And why would he allow this? Korah's rebellion, where he killed Korah, had rebelled against, challenged the authority of Moses and Aaron, and so the ground opened up, swallowed Korah and all of his family, and then fire came out from the tabernacle and killed 250 people. It would appear to me that some innocent people died. Apparently, either they were guilty and God knows more than me, which obviously he does know more than me, or God saw things in a different light. But that's troubling. That's difficult. The bronze serpent, God sends fiery snakes, whatever those are, to go and bite the Israelites, and they start dying from these snakes. And so then he has Moses make a bronze snake that they can look at and get healed. So you've got to deal with that. All right, this is another one that bothered me. I'll do two more quick ones here. David's census. David takes a census of the fighting men in Israel, and God stirs him up. It says that God stirred him up to take the census, so he takes a census, and then God judges him for taking a census. And David didn't really suffer, but the Israelites suffered. Many were killed as a result. 70,000 Israelites were killed because David took a census that God stirred him up to take. Okay, those are things we got to deal with. Uzzah and the ark, where they're transporting the ark of God into Jerusalem, and it's on a cart led by oxen, and the cart starts to tip, and so Uzzah goes to grab the ark of God so it doesn't fall down, and as soon as his hand touches it, boom, God strikes him dead. Freaked David out, so David's like, I'm not bringing that into Jerusalem. Leave that here. Later, he brings it into Jerusalem, and he does it the right way, where the Levites carry it as God told them to do. And that one, I think God, these are things where God does stuff that's kind of troubling. And we go, okay, why did he do that? How can we deal with this? And I'm not going to go into all those. I have reasons that I thought through why all these, I think, line up with the character of God and why they make sense, but that's not what this message is about. But the point is, it's not just supposed genocide that's troubling. There's a lot of things in the Old Testament in particular that are troubling. There's things in the New Testament that are troubling too. But they're there. It's the Word of God, and so we have to deal with it. And we have to deal with it in humility, saying, Lord, I don't know. Help me through this. Number 10, and it's not entirely clear that the Israelites did commit genocide, not even of the Canaanites. The definition of genocide is the systematic and widespread extermination or attempted extermination of a national, racial, religious, or ethnic group. So the perception of Israel going into Canaan is that's what they did. When you start looking at the reality of what happened, it's way less clear. And in fact, I would say my understanding is that even if God commanded that to happen, it didn't happen. For instance, so there are multiple things that happened as Israel goes into Canaan. One thing is God does at times command them to kill all the Canaanites, destroy them all and all their stuff, wipe it out. Deuteronomy 20, verses 16 and 18 says, in the cities of these peoples that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance, you shall save alive nothing that breathes, but you shall devote them to complete destruction. And he lists the Canaanite tribes, that they may not teach you to do according to all their abominable practices that they have done for their gods, and so you sin against the Lord your God. So it seems very clear there. It says, when you go in, this is Moses reminding the Israelites of their covenant with God. He says, when you go into that land, wipe them out. Do not save alive anything that breathes. Sounds like genocide. But that's not the only command that God gives for them going into Canaan. He also tells them at various times, he says, I will drive them out before you. Okay, so you can't, those would seem to be contradictory. Either we're going to kill everyone, or we're going to go and God drives them out before us. But if he drives them out before us, we can't kill them because they're in front of us. Numbers chapter 23, verse 27 to 30. I will send my terror before you and will throw into confusion all the people against whom you shall come. And I will make all your enemies turn their backs to you, i.e. run away. And I will send hornets before you, which shall drive out the different Canaanite tribes. I will not drive them out from before you in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and the wild beasts multiply against you. Little by little I will drive them out from before you until you have increased and possessed the land. Again, Leviticus 18:24, God says, I am driving them out before you. So there are times where God says, go in, destroy them all. There are also times where God says, I will drive them out through various means. Then there are other times where God tells Israel not to destroy them, but to drive them out. Which those are two different things. Numbers 33:52. Then you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you and destroy all their figured stones and destroy all their metal images and demolish all their high places. So we see three different things. Destroy them all. I'm going to drive them out. You drive them out. Those are three different things. So how those all work together, I'm not entirely certain yet. But the point that I'm making is it's not 100% black and white. Israel, go kill them all. There's a lot more going on here. Plus, we know from the Bible itself that many of the Canaanites and other enemies remained for many years. Rahab in Jericho, right after Moses says, go in and don't save a single living soul. Rahab and her father and her entire family are saved out of Jericho. So, okay, we know not everybody was killed. The Gibeonites, as Israel is going into the promised land, the Gibeonites see one after another tribe destroyed by Israel, and so they decide we're going to be sneaky. We'll trick them into making a treaty with us. And so they make a treaty. God didn't ask them to make a treaty. God told them to wipe them out. But they make a treaty. Israel makes a treaty with them, and then God actually holds them to keeping that treaty because later on, many years later, Saul kills the Gibeonites, attacks the Gibeonites, and then God sends judgment on Israel for that. And God's very clear, this is why it's happened, because Saul broke the treaty with the Gibeonites. So this was not a treaty God wanted, but because Israel made it, God's like, well, you made a treaty with them, let them stay in the land and be faithful to hold your treaty. And then the Gibeonites they become slaves, woodcutters, and water boys for the Israelites, and actually they served in the community in general and also in the temple, which is kind of wild to think about. These people that originally God was going to have them destroyed, but it's not all black and white. Go wipe out everybody. King Solomon, he married many Canaanite women, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, Hittites. So if he's marrying many Canaanite women, it means there were at least many Canaanite women still left there in Solomon's day. King Ahab, you all know King Ahab's lovely wife Jezebel. She was a Sidonian princess. Sidon, the Sidonians were a Canaanite tribe. And that's one where nobody questions that they were Canaanites. The Bible's very clear, those were Canaanites. And yet, he marries a Sidonian princess, meaning there's a Sidonian king, meaning that there is a kingdom of Canaanites that are remaining. So on the one hand, you see Israel going in, and it seems like the book of Joshua, it's like boom, 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 boom. They're wiping everybody out. On the other hand, there's a princess. Like, what was that? That would be, I don't know, like 500 years later. There's a kingdom of Canaanites still there. The Amalekites are a really good example of this. As Israel leaves Egypt, preparing to go into the promised land, the first enemy they encounter is the Amalekites. Some say they're not Canaanites, some say they are. They were not in the promised land, but they're kind of in that group of Canaanites and those tribes. So Deuteronomy 25:19, Moses tells them, "You shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven." Yet, the Amalekites remained into Saul's day, and Saul didn't take them out. That's why he got the kingdom taken from him. They remained into David's day. Remember the story of David and his men? Well, this was before David was king. They're running from Saul, and they're at Ziklag, and then a tribe comes in and kidnaps the women and children and steals all their stuff. Who was the tribe? That was the Amalekites. So they remained in Saul's day, they remained in David's day, and even when David was king, it says that he made war with the Amalekites. They still were there. The last Amalekite to die was in Queen Esther's day. It's Haman the Agagite. Agag was a king of the Amalekites. And it says that Haman, and this is kind of interesting, because God did promise that he's going to wipe them out. And so it took a long time. Joshua didn't do it. The Israelites didn't get the job done. It wasn't until finally Haman is killed, he's hung, and all of his sons are killed at that same time. And that seems to be finally all the Amalekites were destroyed. You read the book of Joshua, and it looks like Israel's just going in and bam, 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 wiping everybody down. But that's not exactly what happens. It's a little more fuzzy. Even Joshua chapter 17, verse 13 says, when the people of Israel grew strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but did not utterly drive them out. So, which ended up being a problem for them in many ways. So did Israel commit genocide? Well, sometimes the message of the Bible seems very clear that they went to a city and killed everybody in the city. But it seems like they did not wipe out whole tribes, at least not right off the bat. It took a long time. All right, so you guys all tracking with me? Okay, cool. Now, I'm going to have to just give you the very, very high bird's eye view of this next thing. So what I started this years ago when this question of what did Joshua do to the Canaanites and why is this okay bothered me since I became a Christian, really. But it wasn't until, it's probably like 3 years ago that I finally went, I got to look into this. I want to figure this out. And so what I did was I started just reading in detail what the Bible says about Israel moving into Canaan and what happened. And I tracked every battle. I'm like, okay, who's where, who are they fighting? Why are they fighting them? What happened exactly? And what I found was, okay, so you have kind of two major phases. You have Israel going through the wilderness. Moses for the most part, is leading Israel at that time. And they're not in the promised land yet. They're dealing with enemies of Israel. They're dealing with Canaanite-like tribes that are associated with Canaanites, but they're not in the promised land. 100% of the battles that Israel faced as they were going through the wilderness were defensive battles. You can look it up, 100%. And I can give you more details on that, verses and all that. But I want to give you the broad overview here. But I do have it in my 60 pages of notes here. 100%. That blew my mind. I thought I would see a couple defensive battles, but every single battle that Israel faced as they were going through the wilderness, Israel was not provoking them. Israel was defending themselves and responding to an attack. And in the midst of this, Israel wiped them out. So, okay, Israel still kicked their butts. And wow. But they were defensive battles. Israel was not looking to cause a fight. Many times, let me just look up. So the Amalekites. The Amalekites were called plunderers by in Egyptian. Israel is going through the land. The Amalekites come, and in Exodus 17, and in verse 4. Where does it go? Well, it's 17 verses 8 through 16. The Amalekites come unprovoked. They attack Israel, and it says that they kidnap men, women, and children. Sorry, no, the Amalekites didn't kidnap. Somebody else later kidnapped. They attacked all of Israel. It says specifically that they attacked the men, the women, and the children. And so what's Israel to do? Here's this tribe, the plunderers. They're feared, and they're coming, and they're attacking your wife, your child, your children. You defend. And it says, where is this? It talks about elsewhere. Maybe I've got later in my notes that no tribe of Canaanites made peace with Israel, but God hardened their hearts because he wanted to judge them. And so Israel is defending themselves, and boom, they wipe out the Amalekites. But not every Amalekite was destroyed because they remained until even Queen Esther's day. All right, so you see that with the Amalekites. And then the next enemy they face is the Edomites. Israel it wants to pass through the Edomite land, and so they approach the Edomites. They say, hey, can we pass through your land? And instead of allowing them to pass through their land, the Edomites raise up an army, and they go to face Israel. And now in this instance, Israel didn't wipe them out. They bypassed them. They found a different way. So Israel is not always wiping everybody out who rises up against them. They're only wiping out certain people. Then the next battle that they face going through the wilderness is the king of Arad. And in this case, let's see. In this case, so the king of Arad comes unprovoked. It's Numbers 21. Verse 1, when the Canaanite, the king of Arad, who lived in the Negeb, heard that Israel was coming by the way of Atharim, he fought against Israel and took some of them captive. So the king of Arad sees Israel come, and he goes, I'm going to fight them. And he kidnaps some of them. So what is Israel going to do? They have to retrieve those who are kidnapped and defend themselves. Over and over again, you see this happening as they're going through the wilderness to get to the promised land. Then the next one is Numbers 21, verses 21 to 24. Sihon, king of the Amorites. The Amorites in Babylonian, their name comes from Babylonian, and this is not really that important, but I think it's cool. Their name means the Highlanders, which I think is sweet. So again, they come unprovoked. They go and attack Israel. And I think this one, Israel asked to pass through. They refuse to allow them. And then, again, they raise up an army, and they go attack Israel, and Israel defeats them. And then the next enemy they face is Og, king of Bashan. Numbers 21, verses 31 to 35. Very similar situation where Moses is sending out spies, and then verse 33, they turned and went up by the way of Bashan, and Og, the king of Bashan, came out against them, he and all his people, to battle at Edrei. But the Lord said to Moses, do not fear them, and then they destroy the king of Bashan, Og. And all right, then the next one you have is, okay, so you have these two in Numbers chapter 21. You've got Sihon, king of the Amorites, and Og, king of Bashan. And they're unprovoked battles. They come, they attack Israel. Israel defends themselves and destroys them. But again, there's traces of these tribes throughout the Old Testament after these situations happen. And this these battles between Og, king of Bashan, and Sihon, king of the Amorites, these become sort of a pattern that you see talked about throughout the Old Testament, where God says, treat them like Og, king of Bashan, and Sihon, king of the Amorites. Or in the Psalms, it says, we treated them like Og, king of Bashan, and Sihon, king of the Amorites. And so it's kind of this pattern that seems to be repeated throughout Israel's encounters with other people, is they're going along, and just like what happened with Og, just like what happened with Sihon, these other tribes, they freak out, they go to attack Israel, Israel defends themselves, and Israel kills them. So you see that throughout the wilderness travels, and then it's kind of a pattern later on as well. All right, so then as they're going through the wilderness, the next main battle that they encounter is with Moab and Midian. What happens there is the story of Balaam and Balak. So Balak, the king of Moab, he sees Israel is destroying anybody who attacks them. And so then he decides to do asymmetrical warfare. He's not going to go at them directly. He's going to hire Balaam to curse them. Okay, it doesn't work. It backfires. Balaam blesses them. And so then Balaam advises Balak and the Moabites and then the Midianites, hey, this is how we're going to get them. We're going to seduce them with our women. And it works. They end up getting the Israelite men to fall in love with the Israelite women and start worshiping their false gods. And then as a result, God sends a plague on Israel, kills 24,000. That was the best military victory that the Canaanites had during this phase. They killed 24,000 of them by getting them to sin against God. And so this is warfare. This is an attack on the people of God. It's not conventional warfare. It's what you call asymmetrical or unconventional warfare, using curses and using sin to seduce them, to try to get them to disobey God. But God takes it seriously because it is warfare. And so in response to that, Numbers 31, then Israel is told to go and attack the Midianites and the Moabites. And again, they're told to burn everything, destroy everything. But it was not an unprovoked attack. It was a provocation, asymmetrical, unconventional warfare, but warfare nonetheless. And so what you see as Moses leads the Israelites through the wilderness to get to the promised land, I would say every single one of the battles, as you actually look at what happened, every single one of those battles, Israel is attacked unprovoked. That's very different from what my perceptions were. And now the second phase of taking the promised land is Joshua actually leading the people within the promised land itself. And what you see there is very similar. We don't have as many details about every one of the battles, but of the battles that we have details for, all but 3 are clearly unprovoked battles where Israel was attacked first. The 3 that we don't know about are Libnah. Talks about Israel attacking Libnah and destroying everything in Libnah. We don't know any details other than that Israel attacked and destroyed them and how many people they killed. We do know the discussion of destroying Libnah is, in the context, Israel is destroying other cities. Every single one of those other cities around the time that they destroyed Libnah attacked Israel first. So Libnah, there's a question there. The other one is Jericho. There's no evidence that Jericho attacked Israel first. It doesn't mean that Jericho did not attack Israel first. And I tend to think there's a possibility that they did. And why? Because, God chooses to attack Jericho in a very odd way. He has Israel march around them for 7 days. Why did he do that? I don't know, and the Bible doesn't say exactly why. But one reason could be God wants them to surrender. He's giving them 7 days to go, yeah, you're freaking us out. There's no way we can win against you guys. We surrender. Also, Rahab was saved. And what does Rahab say? It's, where is it? Rahab, it's Joshua chapter 2, verse 9. She says, I know that the Lord has given you the land and that the fear of you has fallen upon us and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. So she saw it was clear. And she's like, we all get it. God's given the land to you. So she made the reasonable choice. I'm going to help you guys because God's on your side. I'm surrendering. So she was saved and her whole family was saved. What if Jericho had done the same thing? I think God was giving them a chance to make peace with Israel, but they didn't take it because they all knew what was coming. I don't know. I could be wrong about that. But there's no evidence in the Bible that they attacked first. But it could have happened because you see most of the time Israel was attacked first. At least there's no evidence that I could find. The third city that I couldn't find evidence that Israel was attacked first, is the city of AI, artificial intelligence. But this is an interesting situation. So what happens in Ai is Israel goes, it's right after Jericho. Israel goes to attack Ai, and they get defeated. I can't remember how many people were destroyed, but they get defeated, and they're like, why did this happen? And God says, because of a man named Achan in your group who decided to keep some of the forbidden objects from Jericho. God told them, wipe out everything in Jericho. Well, Achan kept some stuff for himself. And so then when they go to attack Ai, they're under a curse from God, so they're not going to win the battle. Now, the interesting thing, so then what happens, they kill Achan to remove that curse from them, and then they go and they attack Ai, and they win. Now, something interesting that happens here is, how do they kill Achan? They stone him to death, and they burn him, and then they bury him with stones. How did they destroy Ai? They burn it, and then it talks about that they turned it into a heap of stones. So the treatment of Ai is the same treatment that Achan received, which tells me the issue is not the people of Ai. The issue is, what are they doing? That they're partaking in things that are detestable and an abomination before God. It's not genocide. It's not about wipe out these people I don't like. It's about God bringing judgment for their actions, and he happens to be using Israel to do that. Outside of those three instances, every single other instance that you see as as Moses leads the Israelites into the promised land, and then as Joshua leads them throughout the promised land, taking the land, every other instance is clearly Israel is attacked and they defend themselves, which is phenomenal to me. And that completely changed, when I started looking at it, it completely changed my perceptions of what happened. Like, my understanding was, like I said, Israel goes in, they kill everybody. And I just like, well, I guess I have to deal with that. That's not really what happened. And it wasn't just instant. It took a long time. There were multiple different battles here and there. But for the most part, Israel is attacked. They defend themselves. And God used it to bring judgment on the Canaanites. There are some, if you decide to look at it for yourself, there are some instances where you see statements such as all the kings of the north band together to attack Israel. And then you can trace, okay, who are these kings? And then you look at the different battles they had. This was this king's territory. Oh, yeah, this king with this territory, that's where Israel is now, and they're attacking someone. So it's a part of this bigger war that's going on. But the war was started by the Canaanites, not by Israel. So does that make sense? That's kind of cool to figure out, isn't it? Like, when I realized that, totally blew my mind. I'm like, okay, that gives me a lot more peace. It's still brutal. It's still harsh. It's still tough. But it's like, all right, I can deal with that a little bit easier. Christopher J.H. Wright, again in his book, The God I Don't Understand, he says about it, the conquest of Canaan was not human genocide. It was divine judgment. So the Canaanites were not good. They were bad people and a bad influence on Israel or anybody around them. And God happened to use Israel, brought them into the land. He hardened the hearts of the Canaanites so that they wouldn't make peace. And they were stirred up to fight Israel because God wanted to destroy them, to judge them for their sin. And he just happened to use Israel as that. Where's the... I can't find the verse. This is what happens when you have 60 pages of notes. There's a verse that talks about that God hardened their hearts. But I don't find it right now. So then back to the question of how do we reconcile this God who commanded Israel to do this with the God of the New Testament, the God of reconciliation and love and peace. How do we reconcile those two? Well, I think it works perfect because Jesus took the wrath of God. We deserve to be wiped out, just like the Canaanites were, just like the Israelites later were. We deserve to be judged for our sin, but Jesus took that wrath off of us so we don't have to be judged for our sin. We can be forgiven, and that's why he had to die, so to take the judgment we deserved. So I think it works together perfectly, honestly. Any questions before I move on to the next? All right, sweet. Question 2, and I'm going to try to be very quick because it's almost noon. You guys doing all right? Okay. Question 2, what is our role as a church and as individuals when we see atrocities in the world today? So I would give a few thoughts here. Understand, 1, that we don't know everything. 2, speak or work against injustice where you see it. But major on reaching human hearts with the gospel. During Jesus' day and during the early church, especially the era of the New Testament, there were so many atrocities that I'm surprised that Jesus doesn't mention them. There were just hideous social evils that were going on, political abuses, and for the most part, Jesus ignored them. He focused on people, and he focused on preaching the good news. He focused on healing the sick. He focused on casting out demons, bringing restoration to individual human hearts. That's what he focused on. Teaching about God, getting people to live as believers, live in the Sermon on the Mount lifestyle of forgiveness and love and giving and generosity. That's what he focused on. He didn't focus on all the social evils of his day. Like here's a few. I just off the top of my head listed some. Violent gladiator battles. Did Jesus ever preach against those? Not as far as we know. It didn't make it to the scriptures anyway. He said nothing about the gladiator battles that were going on. And they were everywhere. It wasn't just Rome. Every Roman city, not every major Roman city, had some sort of a gladiator arena. And they would kill each other, fight each other to the death. Jesus doesn't say anything about that. He doesn't say anything about the emperor worship that was going on. And in later years, it got worse. But even in his day, people were calling the emperor God. He doesn't mention that, really. He makes little hints, statements here or there, but no direct condemnation of it. Infanticide. The Romans, this was huge among the Greeks and the Romans. If they had especially a baby girl or a deformed kid, they would put the baby out, let the baby die. Jesus doesn't bring that up. Doesn't mean it's okay. We know from the scriptures murder is wrong, and that's murder. Abortion. They were doing abortions, very primitive styles of abortions at the time, but Jesus doesn't talk about abortion. He doesn't talk about homosexuality directly, especially in a condemnatory way, however you say that. He brings up what true marriage is, and he brings up living in purity, so you can go, okay, well, that means homosexuality is sin, and all throughout the Bible we see it's sin, but he doesn't take this as we gotta fight the gays. Prostitution was everywhere. The most we see Jesus dealing with prostitutes is he's restoring them. He's loving them. He's praying for them. He's ministering to them. All the creepy pagan rituals and cults and things, occult stuff that was around in Greek and Roman society. It was nasty, creepy stuff. Jesus doesn't really talk about it. The barbaric Roman military, they were bad. The Roman military had a policy that every year they would go out and completely obliterate at least one enemy to cause fear throughout the empire. They did this year after year after year, and yet Jesus says nothing about it. There were Roman soldiers that were coming to him. The centurion that came to him for healing, what was his son, I think, right? Jesus doesn't condemn him. Also, on the flip side of that, you had Jewish terrorists, the zealots, and the Sicarii that would kill. They were called Sicarii because they would carry knives, Sika, and they would kill Roman officials. Jesus doesn't rebuke them, and he actually takes one of the zealots and goes, Simon, join my team, make you one of my disciples. Stop with killing. I hope he stopped with the killing. We don't know a whole lot about Simon after that, but I would imagine sometime with Jesus you would give up your violent ways. The corrupt, wicked political leaders of his day, Jesus doesn't really talk about it. He calls Herod a fox, that he's cunning and crafty and bad. That's the most we get for Jesus making a statement against the political leaders of his day. And he could have said a lot more. So Jesus seems to focus on individual people and restoring their hearts and less on the atrocities that were around him. That doesn't mean that, I think there are some people like William Wilberforce in the 1800s that was like, this is my call. I will dismantle the transatlantic slave trade. I want to take it apart. Okay, awesome. I'm reading this book right now that's talking about some of the women. The chapter I just read was talking about some of the women in the abolitionist movement. And it's like these women were just on fire, and I think called from God, speak against this, work against it, dismantle slavery in America. And it's awesome. So I think God does tell certain people, hey, this is your call. I want you to deal with this. But I think if we have to start, though, with, okay, what did Jesus do? And this is the call of everybody, to minister as Jesus ministered. Focus on individual people, meet them, minister to them, be Jesus to them. And so in the midst of doing that, if then you feel this call from God, hey, this is your issue, deal with this. Okay, go for it. Just understand you don't know everything. Have a humble heart about it. And be Jesus in the midst of that. Don't let the atrocity become an idol. And don't let that take over you ministering Jesus. But my personal thinking, my personal feeling is, yeah, do what Jesus did is the best strategy. And if he adds some other social thing on, okay, fine. Question 3, is Israel committing genocide against the Palestinians? Quick answer, what is my opinion? I don't think so. I read tons about it, watched videos, listened to sermons and audio books, and it just filled my mind with so much stuff about this topic. And the last week, not that I'm an expert, far from it, but what I could figure out, it's very hard to find the truth of anything related to this. Everybody has an agenda. Everybody's sharing things with an angle. But I don't think Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians today. Did some Israelis in the past have make genocidal remarks toward the Palestinians? Possibly, depending on how you define genocide. You could say Israel's been rude, they've been wrong, they've done bad things to the Palestinians, and they still do bad things to the Palestinians. Sure, I could agree with that. I've heard some people say it's an apartheid regime. I could possibly agree with that, but again, it's hard to pick out what really is going on. But I don't think there's a genocide that's happening. You could disagree with me on that. It's not the Bible, so fine, we can have different opinions, and I'm willing to change. I'm not going to die on that hill. But, okay, the main reason that I don't think Israel is committing genocide is, okay, somebody call out a genocide that we know, that you know. What's that? Khmer Rouge. Okay, another one, anybody? Rwanda. Anybody else?
Hitler and the Jews.
The Jews, yeah, okay. So those are like 3 big ones right there that I think about. But I got numbers for the Holocaust. So the Holocaust, which we're all like, it's a genocide for sure, or the Khmer Rouge and Rwanda as well. So if you look at the population statistics of the Palestinian Arabs, and you can find numbers from 1950 all the way up to 2021, the population of Palestinian Arabs within Israel increased every single year except for 1969. Yeah. I don't know why 1969 it decreased. I tried to find out. I thought, was there like some major thing that happened? A lot of them left, or was there a terrorist attack? I don't know. I couldn't find out. But it increases for every single year except for that one year. Now, you look at the population statistics of worldwide Jewish population during that time. It increases every single year except for from 1939 to 1945. It went from 16 million Jews down to 11 million worldwide. Okay, that's a Holocaust. There's your evidence right there. You look at, the Rwandan genocide. I think it was hundreds of thousands of, was it Hutus or Tutsis? I can't remember who died. Well, a lot of different people died, but it was hundreds of thousands, I think, were killed in that. The Khmer Rouge, same kind of thing. So you could see the evidence, okay, there's a population drop, something happened. You don't see that with the Palestinian Arabs. So you could say the Israelis are racist. You could say it's an apartheid. You could argue it's an apartheid regime, which I don't know if I would or not personally. But you could say there's been injustice. Yeah, I agree with that. You could say it's oppressive, discriminatory, sure. I just don't think genocide is happening. But on Israel's part. But now, let's flip it on its head. I do think Hamas has genocidal intentions. At least in the past they have had, and possibly now still do. So Hamas is the currently ruling party in Gaza. It means the Islamic Resistance Movement. It's an Arabic acronym for Islamic Resistance Movement. listed by the US, Israel, and the EU as an international terrorist group, funded largely and armed by Iran, also armed by the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. Thank you, Joe. Interesting thing I learned about Hamas. Israel and the US helped create Hamas. Did you guys know that? You know that, okay. I did not know that. Israel was trying to create a counter force to the PLO, Yasser Arafat and the PLO, and so they funded, among other groups, they funded Hamas. And they supported Hamas, they armed Hamas, and America also helped them do that to try to lessen Yasser Arafat's power. Yasser Arafat actually called Hamas a creature of Israel. Brigadier General Yitzhak Segev, the military governor in Gaza, said that, yeah, he had a budget from Israel to go and fund these Islamist groups, and Hamas was one of the most effective. And so he would do it to try to defeat Yasser Arafat. But Hamas is committed to Sharia law. They have estimated between 10 and 40,000 fighters in Gaza. You can watch videos and read articles online of the evil stuff they do, the indoctrination of kids. Has anybody watched any of the kids programs that Hamas makes? Oh my gosh, they are just twisted, sick. Yeah, and no wonder the kids are thinking Israel is bad, because they're growing up watching these things that talk about we're going to drink the blood of the Jews. Jews murder our children. Jews do this, Jews do that. It's just wrong. I've watched videos of kids, Palestinian kids, trained by Hamas. It's at I think it was a 5th grade graduation ceremony. Where for their graduation ceremony, they have fake AK-47s, and their job is to go to do a fake battle killing Jews, and in like a fake Jewish city. It's like, this is not okay. That's bad. So Hamas does bad stuff. They use human shields, and this is something where I'm like, okay, a lot of things I was seeing about this, Israel said, it's like, Israel claims they use human shields. Israel claims they use human shields. Yeah, but do they? Because of course Israel's going to claim that, and the Palestinians will claim they don't. Oh, actually no, the Palestinians claim they do. Like, your average Palestinian citizen says, yeah, I've been a part of that. They have forced us to stand and be shot at and not let us flee. Also, some of the Palestinian leaders, Hamas leaders, have said, this is great glory. When the Israelites come to drop the bombs, stand on your roofs, and God will protect you, and you will go to paradise. This is the glory to die as a martyr. Yeah, they use human shields, and they use that. This is asymmetrical warfare. If anybody's interested, I can send you a very interesting video. This Navy SEAL, I think it was a Navy SEAL, he breaks down Hamas's strategies they can't defeat Israel, so they want to win sympathy from the West, so the West will force Israel to allow Hamas to continue to thrive. And so how do they win sympathy from the West? Civilian casualties. So it's part of their strategy. So Hamas is bad for the Palestinians, bad for the Israelis. And in their 1988 charter, I read the whole charter, and it's filled with racist, anti-Semitic statements, crazed conspiracy theories, just whacked stuff about the Jews and the Freemasons, and they cause all the wars in the world, and they control all the finances, and it's just like, this is like listening to some weird right-wing radio host, AM radio. Nobody listens to this, but it's in their 1988 charter. Now, disclaimer, 2017, Hamas redid their charter, and they removed a lot of the crazed racist stuff. And they made it more about political stuff, less about the Jews are evil. So I don't know what's really where Hamas is at today, but the original 1988 charter was bad. They said things like, in the face of the Jews' usurpation of Palestine, it is compulsory that the banner of jihad be raised. Jihad, meaning we're going to kill. Our struggle against the Jews is very great and very serious. The Prophet Allah, bless him and grant him salvation, the Prophet Allah, bless him and grant him salvation, has said, the day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight the Jews, killing them, when the Jew will hide behind stones and trees. The stones and trees will say, oh Muslims, oh Abdullah, there's a Jew behind me, come and kill him. That's quoting from the Quran. It is necessary to instill the spirit of jihad in the heart of the nation so that they would confront the enemies and join the ranks of fighters. I swear by the holder of Muhammad's soul that I would like to invade and be killed for the sake of Allah, then invade and be killed again, and then invade again and be killed again. Nothing is more significant or deeper than in the case when an enemy should tread Muslim land. Resisting and quelling the enemy becomes the individual duty of every Muslim, male or female. Nationalism of the Islamic resistance movement, Hamas, is part of its religion. Its members have been fed on that. For the sake of hoisting the banner of Allah over their homeland, they fight. Leaving the circle of struggle with Zionism is high treason, and cursed be he who does that. So it's like, okay, if anybody has genocidal intentions, I would say it's Hamas. And I separate Hamas as a political movement, call them terrorists or call them freedom fighters. If you're Palestinian, you might think of them as freedom fighters, but I would separate that from your average Palestinian people. But I think Hamas preaches genocide against the Jews. Now, like I mentioned, 2017, they removed a lot of the overtly anti-Semitic crazed statements, and they clarified that their fight is a political fight, more political fight than a religious fight. So what is really the current truth? I'm not sure exactly, but looking at the evidence and what Hamas does, I think they would kill the Jews, want to kill the Jews. So I would say they're guilty of genocide more than the Israelis are. All right, but having said that, Israel has also done some very unsettling, unjust things toward the Palestinians in their history and even up to the modern day. I read way too many news articles about Israel, situations where like a teenage boy, a Palestinian boy, throws a rock at a tank. And so they arrest the boy, stick him in jail, they stick his dad in jail, his sister loses her job, and they bulldoze the family's home, let a Jew build his house there, and they force the Palestinians to live far, far away out in the countryside somewhere. That's not okay. And there's a lot of situations like that where Israel it's not been eye for an eye, it's been like, eye for two eyes, it's injustice, some of what Israel has done against the Palestinians. They've built, when I was over in Israel, we had a Jewish tour guide, and so he's very pro-Israel, and right now he's fighting Hamas on behalf of Israel, rejoined the military. But while we were over there, we went to places where he's pointing out, he's like, yeah, this settlement here, this is illegal Jewish settlements in land that's actually, it's Palestinian land. And he pointed out a number of those. And we asked, well, what can the Palestinians do? And he said, nothing, because the government doesn't care. The Israeli government doesn't care, and the West supports Israel. This is an Israeli Jewish guy who is fighting Hamas right now. And he's willing to say, yeah, there are some wicked things, there's some bad things that the Israelis have done. Many times, their strategy was they would move into Palestinian homes, or they go and they bulldoze the Palestinian home and they build their home on there. And then because the Jews are more well-connected and well-funded, the Palestinian can't do anything about it. After Israel became a nation in 1948, they went and they changed all the maps of the area. The area had been called Palestine. Going all the way back to the Greek times, it was referred to variously as Palestine, Israel, Syrio-Palestine, a lot of different names, but going back, it was sometime in the Greek world that it was first referred to, I believe it was then as Palestine, Palessa, something like that, going back to Philistines, their name for the Philistines that were living there. So after Israel became a nation, they changed all the street names, all the city names, all the hill names, the river names, from Palestinian Arabic words to Hebrew words. That's a sign of genocide. I mean, it's a genocidal tactic, trying to wipe out a cultural identity. Israeli government officials have refused to acknowledge that the Palestinians are a cultural identity. The Prime Minister, Golda Meir, is famous for saying many statements to that effect. There were no Palestinians here. The Palestinians are not a people. The Palestinians don't have a culture. It's like very degrading. And you could say, take it from her angle. She's like, I think she's meaning it like they're Arabs. They're Arabs like everybody else, but from the Palestinians, they're like, no, we're a distinct group of Arabs, and now you're stealing our cultural identity. That is a tactic of genocide. So do I believe Israel is committing genocide? No, but they have done some really evil things that are tactics that are used by those who do commit genocide. And I think if you ask them about it, they would say, well, many of them, they'd say we had good intentions, or we did it for good reasons, but still it's like, yeah, but it's bad. Here's a statement from Israeli author Simcha Flipan in the book The Birth of Israel. They're talking about the first Arab-Israeli War in 1948, or if you're Israeli, the War of Independence. Says, so David Ben-Gurion, he was the first Israeli prime minister, and he really led the charge for Israel to declare that they were a nation. And it says that his ultimate aim during this War of Independence was to evacuate as much of the Arab population as possible from the Jewish state can hardly be doubted, if only from the variety of means he employed to achieve his purpose, most decisively the destruction of whole villages and the eviction of their inhabitants, even if they had not participated in the war and stayed in Israel, hoping to live in peace and equality. That's the perspective of an Israeli person of what happened in 1948. It's not today. It's, 80 years ago. But that's a very genocidal type thing. So you could maybe argue at the time, back then in the 40s, they were hoping for genocide. I'm not so certain about that, but it's possible. But are they today committing genocide? I don't think so. Okay, question 4, and I gotta go real fast through this because I'm getting hungry too. If you need to leave too, you can leave. I won't judge you. I will secretly complain to my wife tonight, though. No complaining. Yeah, I promise, Grayson. All right, question 4. How should we as believers respond to what is happening and has happened between Israel and the Palestinians? So like I said, I did so much reading this last week and studying, and I texted Brian a few days ago. My head is so full of Jew, Israeli, Muslim, Arab. I can't take any more of this. They're all bad and they all need Jesus, which is basically where I'm at. So, in looking at all this stuff, someone once famously said, the first casualty of war is the truth. That is so true. It's everything you look up about Israeli-Palestinian relations. Everyone has an agenda. And so you look up something, and like I watched, you guys have all probably heard about the beheaded babies, right? Yeah. Didn't happen, as far as I can tell. I could not find any credible source that said it happened. All the credible sources I could find said, yeah, that was not true. But we all believe it happened because somebody said it happened and it just went everywhere. Didn't happen. Okay, also there's the flip side. So there's lies about what Hamas did. There's also lies about what Israel did. When the hospital was bombed, everybody said, Israel bombed the hospital. It looks like, no, Hamas fired a rocket and it misfired and it blew up their own hospital. It looks like that's probably what happened. But everything that's happened, everyone has an agenda and they're all trying to twist the events for a certain angle. So it's very hard to find out what actually is happening. And then also going back in history, it's hard to find out what happened in history because it's 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, whatever. So it's very difficult. And then, for everything you see too, like the Palestinians will say, look at what Israel did. And then Israel will say, well, we have good reasons for that. Or, no, that's not the truth. And then the Palestinians go, yeah, but. And like you can just follow this. You're like, well, what is true? It's really hard to find. Have you heard about the 2018 peaceful protests of Palestinians? Raise your hand if you heard about those. So 2018, thousands of Palestinians gathered together to peacefully protest the Israeli government and their treatment of the Palestinians. They gathered, I think it was 18 months, and for the most part peaceful, and not like our fiery but peaceful protests. It really was peaceful. Israeli soldiers came, snipers were sent, and they killed innocent, unarmed, peaceful protesters. You can watch horrific videos of it. It's really unsettling. So you see that and you go, that's bad. That's wrong. Well, then Israel responds and said, yeah, but Hamas was using that, and there were there were people working for Hamas there, and they were using that to recruit people to Hamas. Okay, that makes sense. But then you look into the people that they killed, and their families say, they had nothing to do with Hamas. They were not into Hamas. They actually loved Israel and just wanted peace with Israel. Okay, well, what is the truth? I don't know. It's very hard to find out. Okay, then another thing, there's a website called If Americans Knew, and you can go there and get a very pro-Palestinian viewpoint on a lot of stuff, and they're filled with statistics, and the woman who made it, she's a journalist, Alison Weir, I think is her name, something like that, and she's got everything footnoted and all that, but sometimes though, like she'll say something. I shared this one with Brian. It was a statistic. It showed the numbers of Palestinians killed since 2000 versus the number of Israelis. My perception is Palestinians are wiping out Israelis because they're just causing terrorist attacks all the time. And so more Israelis would be killed than Palestinians. Numbers show more Palestinians have been killed in the conflict than Israelis. So I shared that with Brian, and Brian's great. He's good with math, and he's good at like picking apart flaws in logic. And he goes, yeah, well, if all the Palestinians that are getting killed are all bad and they're all terrorists, more would die. I'm like, well, that's true. So the numbers say more Palestinians died, but why did they die? Did you know in America, more gang members are killed than soccer moms? Yeah, it's because we live in an oppressive regime. No, it's because you're a gang member, you're going to get shot. That's stupid. Don't do that. So if these Palestinians are being killed because they're engaging in terrorist activities, yeah, we would expect them to be killed. If they're being killed because Israel is a genocidal apartheid regime, that's wrong and that's different. So there's a lot like that where it's just hard to pick out what is the truth. Where do I want to go with this? But, okay, I do want to give you, do you guys want more? You want more? Okay. All right, and if you have to go, you have to go. Don't worry about it. But to give I think it's important to know some of the history of how we got to this point. So I want to try to give you, as briefly as I can, an overview of how we got here. So I went to school for, aerospace engineering, and then I switched to history when I realized I wanted to be a pastor because I wanted to. Because history was a lot easier for me, and I like knowing why the world is the way it is. And so whenever I see something in our world today, I think about how did we get here? Why are we here today? And so I was talking about this with somebody about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and I said they're not doing this because they just randomly woke up one day and said, they woke up October 7th and said, let's be crazed, take a bunch of drugs, and do some sadistic, homicidal, evil things over there in Israel. No, they get to that point for a reason. Like, I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and go do that. I hope none of you guys are going to do that. You get there for a reason after years of history happening. Whether it's, everything happens because of the buildup to that. Things have an effect. And so I told him, I don't think the Palestinians are doing this for no reason. They have a motive. They have some things that have brought them to this point of where this is good, where they see this, they see the opportunity to do that, and they go, yeah, October 7th, I want to do that. This is an appropriate thing to do. So how did they get there? So I told him that I think it's important to look at the history of it. And he just laughs and goes, they're not human. They don't think like we think. They're not Westerners. Those are Muslims. They're evil. They're monsters. Why do they do evil? Because they are evil, and you can't rationalize it. They don't rationalize. They have no ability to rationalize. I don't believe that. I don't think that's scriptural. We are all made in the image of God. Yeah, bad doctrines and bad ideologies and bad religions and demonic spirits can twist you and pervert you and distort you so much where you start to act like an animal, but you're a human. And so there's a reason they got to that point. How did they get there? So I think it's important to look at the history of it. And now I think it's important to say, no matter what the history is, to bring Israel and Palestine to this point, and no matter how guilty Israel may be or Palestine may be, we are at this point today, and we can't go back in time. You can't make Israel disappear. You can't undo what was done. And so now And modern Israelis are not guilty for what their grandparents or great-grandparents did. Modern Israelis are guilty for whatever you are doing. I'm guilty for whatever I do. I'm not guilty for what my government does. The Palestinians are not guilty for what their government does. The Israelis are not guilty for what their government does. You are guilty for what you do. And even this flies in the face of one of the Israeli guys. He said, well, the Palestinians, they know what Hamas is, and they know what they do. And the fact that Hamas is there, because they haven't gotten rid of them, they're guilty. No, like Hamas, half of Palestinians are kids. Do you expect little kids, even ones trained by Hamas, to grab weapons and overthrow Hamas? Hamas is the only ones that have weapons. So how are the Palestinians who are unarmed going to, and half of them are kids, how are they going to overthrow a wicked regime? Even if they know how wicked they are, they're probably not going to be able to do that. So you can't judge the Palestinians for their government. You also can't judge the Israelis for their government. And I'm not doing that. And you can't judge current Israelis for what happened in history. But it's important to know the history because it can kind of flesh out why these things are happening. Not that I expect any one of us is going to solve the situation, but it can help you understand a little bit. So this information, I got a list of sources and stuff that I got this stuff from, but I'm not going to share that. But if you're interested, I can give you some really good books on all this stuff on both sides of the kind of the pro-Palestinian side and the pro-Israeli side, and then some balanced stuff that covers all of it. So let's see. So let me go here. Just a brief historical perspective. So when you look at that section of the world, a few things are clear. One is that this little volatile region of the planet was controlled and settled by various empires, various regimes, various nations through thousands of years. And the Jews held it for between 300 and 600 years. That's it. But it's been controlled by a lot of different regimes through the years, ranging from the Greeks, the Romans, the Persians, the Ottoman Empire, the Mamluk Empire from Egypt, the Seljuk Turks had control, the Crusaders. So in that time, in the thousands of years that has existed, you have one empire, one regime after another taking control in that region. In that entire time, the Jews were there. It was their homeland for only between 300 and 600 years. That's it. Now, it was how long were the Arab Palestinians there? 1,300 years, beginning in 632 AD when the Muslims invaded. So by the 300s, by the early 300s, the majority of that area was Christian. As Christianity expanded. From 300s to 632, it was still Christian. 632, the Muslims invaded, and slowly through the years, Islam started to take over. Arabic became the main language, and Islam was the main religion. And it was that way from 632 all the way up to 1948 when Israel became a state. So Israel, for all their claims, all the times they make claims to the land, they don't have that strong of a claim to the land. I would say the Arabs have a stronger claim if you want to look at like time you were there. But again, we can't go back in time, so we are where we're at. But that's important to keep in perspective. Second thing, until Israel became a modern nation in 1948, this small region, call it Israel, call it Palestine, it was dominated by Muslim Arabs for a very long time, and any of the Jews that were there were a minority. They were as small as, well, never since, from the destruction of Jerusalem in, I think it was 538 BC, all the way up to just a few years ago, Jews were the minority in Israel, Palestine. All the way from over 500 BC to just a few years ago. More Jews lived outside of Israel than within Israel. That's what I meant to say. And all the way up until shortly after, sometime in the 1950s probably, Jews were the minority in that whole region. In 1948, they were only 30% of the region when they declared statehood. Third thing, historically, that you learn is, so there was a movement called Zionism. And in Hamas, in their current charter makes a distinction between Jews and Zionists. We hear the term Zionist, and we typically, whenever we hear a Palestinian say that, we go, oh, they mean Jew. They don't mean Jew. Zionist was a political movement that started in the 1880s. During the 1800s, there's a fascinating time in history where the Italians, the Germans, and even African Americans were talking about getting a homeland. The Jews were doing the same thing. It started in the 1840s. There was a Christian doctrine started by John Darby. You might have heard of the Darby Bible. He started a doctrine called dispensationalism, which taught that for Jesus to come back, there needed to be a modern nation of Israel with a temple. John Darby started to teach that. Certain Jews around the 1880s then, and Christians started to teach that and kind of push toward, the Jews should have a nation. And then Jews grabbed a hold of it as well and said, why don't we have a nation? And there was anti-Semitism in Europe. And then you have World War I, even more anti-Semitism. World War II, you've got the Holocaust. And so there's this real push, especially among European Jews, but Jews throughout the world, that we need a homeland. And so that's Zionists. Zionists were the Jews, starting in the 1880s, that said, we deserve a homeland where we won't be persecuted. And they looked at a number of different places. They looked at Uganda. They looked at Argentina, Crete, I think it was, and Texas, actually. And they decided on Palestine, Israel. And they said, this is the place. And so there was a movement then, starting in the 1880s, of Zionists, Jews saying, we need a homeland, we deserve a homeland, and it's going to be Palestine. And so they started, they were supported by, especially the British, but a lot of Europeans, and they were supported by the Americans, who were dispensationalists, who believed that we need a homeland for the Jews so that Jesus will come back. And so you had this push from Americans and from the British to encourage and facilitate Jewish settlement in Palestine, Israel. And the British were really big on this. So there's a document called the Balfour Declaration in 1917 where they said, this is what we're going to work for, building a Jewish homeland here. And so the Jews loved it. They're like, this is great. You're going to help us get a homeland. Great, awesome, let's do it. Well, guess who didn't like that? Those who were living in Israel, Palestine at the time, the Arabs. They weren't too happy about that. Now, the Jews say, it was a desert. It was empty. And there's some truth to that. It's not entirely true, but it was not as developed as it is today. And you did have some nomadic Arabic tribes, but they had started to gather together. And even during this time of where nations wanted, ethnic groups, people groups wanted a nation, the Arabs were one of those groups as well. And they joined with, during World War I, they joined with the British to topple the Ottoman Empire, with the promise that the Arabs of the Palestine area would receive, in compensation, their own nation state, a Palestinian Arab nation state in what is modern Israel. So Britain, so you've got this push of Zionists saying, we need a homeland. And some of that's, it's good, but do the Jews deserve a homeland? Does anyone deserve a homeland? No, none of us deserve a homeland. I mean, the Gypsies don't have a homeland. The Uyghur Muslims in China, they don't have a homeland. Nobody deserves a homeland. But okay, fine. There's this political movement. It was secular atheist Jews that started it, and you can read up on some of the founders. Some of them were just creepy stuff. Bad families, yeah. And but they started this movement and to push toward resettling Israel with Jews, and the British and the Americans really supported it. The Americans were the ones who finally pushed it through, forced it through the UN eventually in 1947. But you have this, beginning in the 1880s, a resettlement of that area where Arabs are currently living. And now, not only were the Arabs like, okay, hey, this is weird because we're Arab, you're Jewish, why are you coming in here? But also, these Jews that were moving there, they were very heavily funded. They were very well connected throughout the world. There were Rothschilds that were supporting this. They didn't name any big Jewish name that's probably a part of some conspiracy theory. They were a part of this. And so the Jews that are coming in, they're wealthy, they're well connected, not just within each other. They're well connected with world political leaders. And they're European, so they think like Europeans. They think like Americans. And so the Europeans who had, at that time, had rule over that part of the world, naturally would gravitate toward them and would give them privileges that they didn't give to the Arabs. Maybe racism, it could have been racism, or just the natural, well, we think more like these people and we understand these people, we speak the same language, so you're going to show preference to them whether you try to or not. So what happened was you had an influx of Israeli immigrants, and within 30 years, from 1880 to I think it was 1914, they almost tripled. The amount of Jewish immigrants almost tripled in size in Israel, Palestine. And so not only are the Arabs seeing there's a lot of Jewish people coming here, and some of them were taking Arab lands, and not only were there a lot coming, but these are really well-funded, powerful, influential Jewish people that are coming there. So you as a poor Arab shepherd, you're like, I'm getting scared here. And plus, Britain, who had a protectorate, had a mandate from the League of Nations to take care of, to oversee this region, has promised you secretly that you will have an Arab nation here, but publicly declared that they're going to build a Jewish nation here. You're asking for trouble. Okay, so where am I at now here? So while the Jews were settling the area, there was violence, a lot of violence, to the point where eventually in the 1930s, Britain said, we can't handle you guys, we want out. And they didn't finally get out until 1947. But there was a lot of violence from Britain took over in like 1922, I think it was, up to 1947. There was violence from the Arabs, there was violence from the British, but the most violent groups at the time were the Jewish terrorists. They call them freedom fighters today because what do we say? Well, history is written by the victors. So the Jews, they look back at it and they say, that's our George Washington. Those are our freedom fighters. They built our land. So from their perspective, they're like, this is great. But the most violent acts were done by these Jewish terrorist groups. And now to make it even creepier and more offensive even to the Arabs, at least two of the leaders of these violent terrorist groups, Ergon and I don't remember the name, Leahy, I think it was. The leaders of Ergon and Leahy were the 6th and the 7th prime ministers of Israel. So you have these guys that the Palestinians called terrorists, the British called them terrorists, and they were wreaking so much havoc that the British had to get out. Those guys are leading your nation. So it's just a powder keg. There's going to be problems. One of the things that happened was, well, okay, let me look here. No, I won't go into detail. So some of the horrific acts, you can read about all the evil things that they did, the Palestinians and the Jews. But again, the most horrific ones, from my perspective, seem to be the Jewish terrorist groups. Most of their attacks were on military or government institutions, but they also attacked individual people. And some of the attacks you can read about, just evil things they did that are at least as bad as October 7th. Rape, lining people up, mowing them down with machine guns, burning people alive, innocent civilians. Going into a town, they went into a town of 600 and killed, nobody knows exactly how many. The estimate is between 100 and 250 people, Palestinians, a village. People were bad all around. And the Palestinians also, same thing. The Arabs were fighting the Jews were fighting the Arabs. Both of them were fighting the British, bombing buildings, blowing up bridges, assassinating British officials. So violence all around, but the Jewish terrorist groups were the worst. The flashpoint of all of this seems to be May 14th, 1948, when Israel declared themselves a state, a nation. Before that time, there was fighting, but it wasn't to the scale that we saw after Israel declared themselves a state. There was something about that the Arab Palestinians there were like, oh, so this is war. Like, they're willing to fight, they're getting scared, they're not sure what's going on, they're reacting. But once Israel declared themselves a state, then you see 5 Arab nations and the Arab Palestinians all joined to attack Israel. And now some people say, see, this is because the Muslims hate the Jews, and as soon as they were a state, they're like, kill them. Others say and I don't think that really makes sense, because why didn't they do that earlier? I think they probably saw, shoot, any chance for us to build a Palestinian state is gone, because Europe pulled out, Israel has declared that they're a nation, and we know what the Zionist political movement does, that they want to take over the whole area. And they were building settlements, they were kicking out Arabs, they were stealing Arab land, they refused to, there was a doctrine called something labor, I can't remember what it's called now, but a doctrine among the Zionist movement where they would not work for or work with or hire Arabs, they would work with Jews. That's it, because they wanted to build their Jewish state. And so you as an Arab, you see this, and then you see these are the most frightening terrorists, freedom fighters, that we've had to deal with, and now they're in control. You call on your buddies and you say, we need to attack now because this is our land and there's not going to be another chance we can get it back. And some people say that the Palestinians went into Israel and attacked Israeli lands. Others say, no, all the battles were on Palestinian soil that the Israelis had taken. I don't know. I didn't have time to weed through all the details and figure it all out. But what's that? Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Okay, but 1947, the UN said, okay, we're going to split it between Palestinian and Arab, and we're going to give the Arabs, we're going to split it between Palestinian and Jew. We're going to give the Palestinians 48% of the land, and we're going to give the Jews 52% of the land. This was a problem because the Jews were 30% of the people and owned 7% of the land at the time. So suddenly the Palestinians have most of their land stolen. And so they rose up and attacked Israel to try to get their land back. Didn't work. Israel ended up so Israel had a modern 40,000 person military that they'd already built up secretly while the British had a mandate over them. And they were funded by Americans and armed to the teeth with expensive modern American weapons. The Arabs, Jordan was the only country that had an actual army. The rest, it was peasants just rising up. So what happened is Israel just destroyed them, slaughtered them left and right. And you can read some just vicious, evil things that the Israelis said and like the glee that they had as they wiped them out, reminiscent of October 7th. So, and again, this is not saying October 7th was good or excusable. And it's not saying what Israel did was good and excusable. It's saying they're all bad, but you can see why the Palestinians have a hard time wanting to make peace with Israel then. So this was the War of Independence, or the first Arab-Israeli War. And when that happened, so 1948, May 14th, 1948, is when that first, May 14th, Ben-Gurion declared Israel is its own nation, a Jewish state, and May 15th is when the Arabs attacked. But not all the Arabs were a part of it. It's not like all, 3 million Arabs gathered and they're like, we're going to crush Israel. No, you had a lot of people that were not a part of the war, did not want to fight. But war is coming, so what do? They're like, we're getting the heck out of here. And so in the midst of the war, it lasted a handful of months, I don't remember exactly how long, but in the midst of it, the Arabs left. 700,000 left as refugees. And some people say that the leaders of the Arab army told the non-combatants, run away, and then when we beat Israel, you can go back. And I don't know if you've heard this lie. I've heard that, or heard this line. I've heard that. There's no evidence that was actually said. The U.S. has records of, we were monitoring all the radio chatter, and it never was said. But regardless, so these people freaked out. They ran away. They didn't want to fight. They ran away. Israel fights the war. They have a modern military. They slaughter people left and right. They take the land. And then after the war, what is supposed to happen is then you let the non-combatants come back. Let them into their homes. Israel didn't do that. 750,000 Palestinians were run out of their lands, and when they came to come back, they were met at gunpoint, or they were met by their home was bulldozed, and they weren't allowed to come back. 200,000 ended up in a tiny strip of land called the Gaza Strip. And so they've been there since that time. 70% of the people who live in Gaza are directly there because of that war. Some of the people that are there actually were little kids and or teenagers got up and left during that war. Others, their parents were there during that war. But 70% of Gaza is in Gaza because of a result of the war that Israel started. because of the war that happened then when Israel became a nation, and they were not allowed back into their lands. Now, also what happened at that time is 500 Palestinian cities were completely destroyed. And so you have 750,000 people, refugees now, run out of their homes. 500 of your towns are destroyed. Your society is in ruins. 200,000 people added to Gaza. I forgot the population that they had at the time, but it increased it hugely. And so you can just imagine why the Palestinians have problems today. Try to resolve that in 80 years. And without God, and with all the bitterness and the hurt and the anger and the rejection and all the pent-up frustrations and continuing problems, at least from their perspective. So I've heard stories, Jewish people or Israelis, they say well, we keep offering, I've read an article where an Israeli was we keep offering help. We keep saying, hey, come be our friends, but they don't want to be our friends. Yeah, because you treated them like that. And okay, ultimately, we can't go back in time. We can't delete that stuff. So yeah, the Palestinians need to repent. They need to forgive. They need to make friends and make peace. Israel, same thing. So they do have to get over it, or we're just going to have the same thing over and over again, fighting and refighting again and again. But going through some of that, you can see why there's some hostility. And ultimately, my opinion is I don't think Israel should have ever been made a state. I don't think biblically you don't see any promise that God would remake the state of Israel over there. They lost the land. After they lost the land the first time, God did promise to bring them back. But once he brought them back, he didn't say you're going to lose the land. He did say that they would lose the land again. Jesus prophesied it. But he didn't say, there was never any promise in the New Testament of them coming back again to the land. So I don't think God built it. I don't think people should have gotten involved to encourage this. I don't think America or Europe should have done this. If anything, Europe has been the capital of anti-Semitism throughout history. If anything, Europe, to apologize for the Holocaust, should have said, hey, how about we give you a chunk of land in Germany? Or that would have been awesome. But instead they went, we don't want to give up our stuff. Hey, those Arabs can't say no, so we'll give the Arabs land to them. But we can't go back in time. You can't delete Israel. You can't undo what's done. So, all right, now we got to make peace. So, all right, how should we as Christians respond? Admit the situation is messy and complicated. People seem very either pro-Israel or pro-Palestine. It's can we all just simmer down and realize it's way more complicated? So I think we got to admit it's complicated. It's messy. Number two, I think we should love Jesus because he's the answer. I think we should treat all Israelis and Palestinians with dignity and honor, no matter what, even the terrorists, even the colonizers, whatever you want to call them, they are all deserving of dignity and respect and love because they're made in the image of God. And I think we as Christians should model that and treat them well, love them, forgive them. And I think we should give everyone the freedom to have their own opinion, their own political opinion about this. Like I said, I don't believe that Israel should have ever been made a state. I should be able to say that. Now, unfortunately, if I say that, my Jewish friends will probably call me anti-Semitic. And my Jewish friend, I have one token Jewish friend. It's not. I'm not anti-Jewish. I just think you should never have done that. I don't think that was right. I should be able to say that. I should be able to say I think Israel should wipe out Hamas because I think Hamas is evil, and if Israel doesn't do anything, Hamas is going to keep doing the same stuff again and again. And so I think Israel has a right to defend themselves, and I think politically they should wipe them out. If you disagree, you should be able to say, no, I think Palestine should be able to wipe out Israel and fight them until they get the whole land to themselves. Sure, fine, you can believe that if you want to. Let's respect each other. We can have different political opinions. It's not a problem. But let's love Jesus and love and respect everybody and see the image of God in them. And ultimately, this is the final thing, and this is the most important thing I'm going to say today. I think we should all thank God that we don't have to sort it out. Yes. So, all right, there you go. I've tried to do that last bit quick. I'm sorry. It's 12:45 right now. You guys were wonderful and patient, and we don't always go this long. But when we do, we talk about complicated uncomfortable topics. All right, let me pray. Jesus, thank you so much that you are in charge. Thank you that you're the king, that you rule the world, and that you're coming back one day, and you're going to sort through everything. Lord, thank you that you are a God of justice. You're a good God. You're a loving God. And Lord, thank you that we don't have to sort out and solve all the atrocities and the problems and the injustices that we see in the world today. Lord, you've got it sorted out, and you know what you're doing, and we thank you for that. Father, I pray that you would bless us, that your peace would be upon us, and that we would be bringers of love and reconciliation and forgiveness wherever we go. In Jesus' name.